The bunker wasn't on any map we carried. It was set into the hillside behind a collapsed tobacco barn about 6 miles east of Rogersville, Tennessee. Down a gravel road that didn't have a name anymore because the sign had been ripped out of the ground and used to board up someone's window 3 weeks prior. We found it because my daughter Cora needed to pee and wouldn't do it in the open. She was 11, and the world had ended, but she still had rules about that, and I loved her for it. I loved that she still had a line she wouldn't cross, even if everything else had crossed every line there was. My husband, Dean, pulled the truck off the road. Our son, Wes, 14, quiet in a way that preceded the outbreak by years, pointed at a shape in the hillside and said, "That's a door." He was right. A steel door, painted the same brown as the clay around it, set into a concrete frame half buried in kudzu. No lock, no chain, just a wheel latch like a submarine hatch. And when Dean turned it, the seal broke with a sound like a jar opening. The smell that came out was cool air and concrete dust, not rot, not mildew, not death, just absence. We'd been on the road for 19 days by then. 19 days since Nashville collapsed inward. 19 days since I'd stood in our kitchen on Belmont Boulevard and watched a man I recognized from the neighborhood, Tom Kircher, who power washed his driveway every Saturday, walk into a parked car, fall, stand up wrong, and bite into the arm of a woman jogging past him before she could even pull her earbuds out. I watched from behind the window over the sink. I didn't scream. I turned around and said, "Dean, get the bags." And he looked at my face and didn't ask a single question. That efficiency probably saved us. The Kircher thing happened at 6:40 in the morning. By 7:15, we were on I-40 East, and the exit ramps behind us were already swelling with brake lights that would never move again. We'd survived since then on canned goods from a church pantry in Cookville, water from a cattle trough that Dean filtered through a shirt and boiled twice, and gasoline siphoned from vehicles whose owners were either dead or changed into something that didn't need to drive anymore. We were not good at this. We were not prepared. I was a data analyst who worked from home. Dean sold medical devices. The sum of our wilderness experience was one disastrous camping trip to Fall Creek Falls in 2019, where Wes got a tick on his neck and we packed up and drove to a Holiday Inn. We were ordinary people with an ordinary family and an ordinary house we would never see again. And the only reason we were alive was that I'd looked out a window at the right time, and Dean had never once, in 16 years of marriage, doubted me when my voice went flat. Dean went in first. He carried the tire iron we'd taken from a stalled Subaru near Cookville. I carried Cora's hand. Wes followed 3 steps behind, which was his preferred distance from all of us at all times. The bunker was small. One main room, maybe 12 by 20 feet. Concrete walls, concrete floor, a ceiling low enough that Dean had to duck slightly. Against the far wall, steel shelving held rows of supplies, canned food, water jugs, a medical kit, batteries, a hand-crank radio still in its packaging. A chemical toilet in a curtained alcove. 2 cots folded against the wall. A camp stove, propane canisters, a bin of wool blankets. Everything organized. Everything labeled. Everything clean. "Somebody built this," Dean said, which was obvious. But his voice had a quality I recognized, the sound of a man trying to keep something from being strange by naming it plainly. Then Cora said, "Mom, come look at this." She was standing near the entrance, by a section of wall to the left of the door. I walked over and looked where she was pointing. Written on the concrete, in black permanent marker, in neat block letters, Anna Lang, Dean Lang, Wesley Lang, Cora Lang. Our names, our ages. The ages were current. Wes had turned 14 in September, 8 weeks before the outbreak. Cora had turned 11 in August. Not rounded, not approximate, exact. Below the names, in the same handwriting, a single line, arriving from Nashville. 4. No medical conditions, except Cora albuterol. Cora's asthma, not severe, not constant, but real. She carried an inhaler. We'd been rationing it for a week because the backup was in a pharmacy we couldn't reach. I looked at that wall for a long time. I looked at my daughter's name written by someone else's hand in a place I had never been, next to a medical detail I had never told anyone outside our pediatrician's office. "We need to go," Wes said from behind me. His voice was careful. "This is someone's place." "It's ours," I said. And I didn't know why I said it, except that I was looking at Cora's name and the word albuterol. And something in my body understood before my mind did that whoever wrote this had not wanted to harm us. Dean touched the ink with his finger. Dry, old, not days old, weeks maybe, written before we arrived, written, possibly, before we left Nashville. We stayed. That first night, I barely slept. Dean and the kids took the cots. Cora curled into Wes's side the way she used to when she was small. And for once, he didn't push her away while I sat against the wall opposite the names and watched the door. Every survival choice we'd made for 19 days had been reactive. Someone's chasing us. We run. That road's blocked. We turn. That building's dark. We skip it. There had been no plan, no strategy, no map beyond east, away from the city, toward fewer people. And here was a place where someone had planned. Someone had written our names on a wall and stocked shelves and calibrated the supplies to a family of 4 with a child who sometimes couldn't breathe. I got up sometime after midnight and went through the shelves by flashlight. Everything was deliberate. The food wasn't random, it was what we ate. Canned black beans, diced tomatoes, tuna in water, peanut butter, the brand of crackers Cora liked with the seeds on top. 2 inhalers, albuterol, the correct dosage, a children's multivitamin, a bottle of the ibuprofen Dean preferred over acetaminophen because acetaminophen bothered his stomach, something he'd mentioned maybe twice in our marriage and never to anyone else. In the medical kit, gauze, antiseptic, a suture kit, but also a tube of the specific eczema cream Wes had used since he was 9. Triamcinolone, the tube still sealed, the right strength. I sat on the floor with the tube in my hands and felt something I couldn't name. It wasn't fear exactly. It wasn't gratitude. It was the feeling of being looked at by someone you've never seen, of discovering that your family had been a subject of study, and the study had been thorough. And the conclusion of the study was this room. Dean woke at first light. I showed him what I'd found. He went through the shelves item by item, his face getting quieter with each one. When he got to the ibuprofen, he held the bottle in both hands and said, "Nobody knows that, about the acetaminophen." "I know. You didn't build this, Anna." "No." "Then who?" I didn't answer because I didn't have one. And because the honest answer I don't know. And it scares me, and I also don't want to leave. Felt like something I wasn't ready to say out loud. That morning, I did an inventory. Dean reinforced the door with a steel bar we found under one of the cots purpose-built, the right length. Wes sat in the corner with his knees up and read the labels on every can, every bottle, every package, as if looking for a message embedded in the brands. Cora used her inhaler for the first time in 2 days, and the color came back into her face. And I watched her breathe without the tiny whistle that had been getting worse for a week. And I thought, I will stay in this room that someone built for my family by a person I've never met, because my daughter is breathing. Around noon, Dean found a notebook on the bottom shelf, tucked behind a package of D-cell batteries. Spiral-bound, college-ruled, the kind you'd buy at a gas station. The first page had a hand-drawn map of our neighborhood in Nashville, with our house circled. The route east was traced in red ink. Not the route we'd taken, but close. Close enough that the divergences seemed to account for road closures that wouldn't have been predictable before the outbreak, but happened exactly as they did. Below the map, a note. If you're reading this, you made it. The food is 90 days for 4 at 1,800 calories per day. Water jugs are sealed. Don't trust the creek until you've tested it. There are iodine tablets in the med kit. The radio will pick up FEMA frequencies if any are still broadcasting. I won't be here. I'm sorry I can't explain more. The second page has instructions for the filtration system in the back alcove. Please use the place. It's yours. It was always yours. No signature, no name, no explanation of how or why. Dean read it twice and set it down. This is insane. This is food for 90 days, I said. Someone was watching us. Before all this, someone was watching our family. Yes. And you want to stay. Cora can breathe here, Dean. He looked at me. I saw the argument forming, and then I saw him look at Cora, and I saw the argument die. He picked up the notebook again and turned to the second page, where the filtration instructions were. He read them in silence, then walked to the back alcove and started assembling the system. That was his answer. Outside, something moved through the trees above the bunker, a shuffling, broken gait, the sound of a body that had forgotten the mechanics of walking but hadn't stopped trying. We'd learned to identify that sound the way you learn to identify thunder. You don't think about what it is. You just wait for it to pass. It passed. The notebook had 12 pages of writing. I read them all that second night while Dean slept and the children breathed on their cots. And each page made the situation stranger and more precise. Page 3 was a schedule. Wake, water check, air the bunker, exercise in the corridor, food prep, evening inventory. Designed for a family with children. Designed for a family that would go insane without structure. Notes in the margin. Cora responds well to routine. Give her a job. Wes needs space. Don't assign him tasks with his father. They argue about method. They argue about method. I'd said those exact words to my sister on the phone maybe 6 months before the outbreak, complaining about how Dean and Wes couldn't assemble IKEA furniture without it becoming a referendum on Wes's attitude. My sister, Renee, who lived in Portland, who I hadn't been able to reach since day 3. Page 4 was a layout of the surrounding area. Topographical, careful, marking water sources, road intersections, and clusters of houses. Some houses had X's through them. Others had small circles. At the bottom, circles are likely still occupied. X's were already empty when I checked. This was current as of October 2nd. October 2nd was 5 days before the Kircher incident, 5 days before Nashville fell. Someone had been mapping this area, marking safe and empty houses before the outbreak reached Tennessee. Before any of us knew, pages 5 through 8 were practical. How to extend the food supply with forage, which plants in the area were edible in November, how to rig the radio, where the nearest standing structure with a well was located, a farmhouse 1.4 miles southeast, marked with the note clear as of October 1st, cellar door locked from outside, key under the third porch step. Pages 9 through 11 were different. The handwriting was the same, but the tone shifted. Less instruction, more, I don't know what to call it, observation. Anna will want to count everything. Let her. The counting is how she processes control. She'll build a spreadsheet in her head, and it will keep her sane. Dean will fix things, even things that don't need fixing. Give him the filtration system first. It's complex enough to occupy 3 days, and simple enough that he won't fail. Wesley won't talk for the first week. He's not depressed. He's metabolizing. When he's ready, he'll ask a question. The question will be mechanical, not emotional. Answer it directly. Cora will ask where the person who made this went. Don't lie to her. Tell her you don't know. She can handle uncertainty better than fiction. I put the notebook down. My hands were shaking, and I realized they'd been shaking for several pages, and I'd been too absorbed to notice. This person knew us. Not the way a neighbor knows you wave from the driveway, complaints about trash day. They knew the interior architecture of our family, how we fought, how we coped, what we needed in order not to break. And they had translated that knowledge into concrete, cans, and chemistry. And then they'd left. The last page 12, had one paragraph. I know how this looks. I know you'll wonder, and I know the wondering will feel like a threat. I need you to understand that I chose your family because of how you are with each other. I watched a lot of people. Most of them wouldn't have made it here. You will. Not because you're strong. Because Anna will make the decision, and Dean will execute it, and Wes will see what neither of them sees, and Cora will remind them why it matters. You are a complete system. I just gave the system a container. I closed the notebook. I pressed it against my chest. And I sat there in the dark, being known by a stranger. And I didn't know whether to be grateful or sick. 3 days in, we fell into a rhythm. Not the one prescribed in the notebook. I was careful about that. Didn't want to feel like I was following someone's choreography. But similar enough that the overlap made my skin crawl. I did count everything. Dean did start with the filtration system. Wes didn't speak for the first 2 days except to say functional things. Hand me that. The left burner works better. It's quiet outside. And on the 3rd day, Cora asked, Mom, who made this place for us? I was portioning rice into 4 bowls. My hands didn't stop. I don't know, sweetheart. But they knew our names. They did. And they knew about my inhaler. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. Then, were they nice? The question almost undid me. Nice. As if the person who had cataloged our family's habits and medical records and emotional fault lines and converted them into a survival bunker could be evaluated on a scale that included nice. I think they wanted us to be safe, I said, which was true and incomplete and the best I could do. Dean heard this exchange from the alcove where he was sealing a pipe joint. He didn't comment. But that night, when the kids were asleep, he sat across from me and said, We need to talk about the notebook. I know. Someone surveilled our family, Anna. Before any of this happened. They knew what Cora's inhaler dosage was. They knew Wes and I argue about how to do things. They knew you'd want to count the food. I know all of this. So how are you calm? I wasn't calm. I was operating. There's a difference, and the difference is that calm means the fear is gone, and operating means the fear is in a drawer you've decided not to open because your daughter is breathing, and your son is eating, and your husband is useful. And if you open that drawer, the whole system falls apart. Because the alternative is the road, I said. And the road is where the dead are. He accepted that the way he'd accepted everything since the morning I told him to get the bags instantly, completely, and with something behind his eyes that wasn't quite trust, but was close enough. On the 4th morning, I went outside for the first time. Not far, just to the tree line above the bunker entrance, where a sight line opened west toward the road. I brought the tire iron. I stood in the cold and listened. The valley was quiet in a way that wasn't peaceful. No birds, no engines, No dogs. The absence of sound had a weight to it, like pressure against the eardrums. I'd noticed it building over the past 3 weeks, the world getting quieter as the things that made noise either died or stopped caring about noise. A figure stood on the road, about 200 yards west, at the edge of the gravel where it met the county blacktop. A woman, or what had been a woman. She was facing away from me. Her left arm hung at an angle that meant the shoulder was dislocated or broken, and she swayed slightly, the way they all did when they weren't tracking something, that idle metronome motion, like a signal searching for a frequency. I didn't move. I'd learned not to. Movement was language to them, and stillness was silence. And you could stand 30 feet from one, and it would pass if you gave it nothing to hear. She swayed for a while. Then she walked south, slow, purposeless, and disappeared around a bend. I went back inside and locked the door and didn't mention it to anyone. Not because I wanted to hide it, because mentioning it would mean acknowledging that the bunker's concealment, the painted door, the kudzu, the setback from the road, had been designed for exactly this. Designed by someone who knew where the dead would walk and how to be invisible to them. That was the part I couldn't sit with. Not the names on the wall, not the inhaler, not the notebook's uncanny knowledge of my family's internal dynamics. The part that kept catching in my throat was the competence. Everything in this bunker worked. Every measurement was right. Every prediction was accurate. And the only way to build something this precise for a specific family was to have studied that family with a discipline and duration that had no innocent explanation. I loved this place. And I was terrified by the person who made it. Both feelings were true at the same time, and neither one was winning. On day 6, Wes asked his question, not to Dean, to me. How far ahead was this planned? I was checking the water jugs marked with fill dates, all from September. What do you mean? The dates on the supplies, the map with the October markings, the route traced before we left. Whoever did this started before the outbreak, maybe weeks before. I noticed that too. So either they knew it was coming, or they were already doing this for some other reason, and the outbreak happened to make it relevant. I looked at my son, 14 years old, and he'd just articulated the 2 possibilities I'd been circling for 6 days without landing on either. Which do you think? I asked. I think it doesn't matter yet. I think what matters is whether they're coming back. The notebook says they won't be here. The notebook says a lot of things. They've all been right so far. He pulled out a thread on his sleeve. That's what scares me. Not that they might be wrong, that they might be right about everything. I didn't have an answer for that, so I gave him what I had. I'm scared too. He nodded and went back to the corner where he'd been reading the topo map. And that was the most words we'd exchanged in 4 days. And both of us were fine with that. Dean, meanwhile, had found something I'd missed. Inside the wall-mounted first aid box, behind the bandages, a plastic bag containing 3 photographs. Polaroids. Our house on Belmont Boulevard, taken from across the street. Our car in the driveway. And one of me, just me walking into the grocery store on 21st Avenue. I was wearing the green coat I'd bought last March. The photo was taken from a parked car through a windshield. I could see the dash reflection at the bottom of the frame. He held the photos out to me without speaking. I took them. I looked at myself walking into a Kroger on a Tuesday afternoon. And the version of me in the photo had no idea she was being watched. And the version of me holding the photo couldn't decide whether to scream or cry. This changes things, Dean said. It changes the feeling. It doesn't change the math. Someone followed you, Anna. Someone followed all of us. And then they built us a place to survive. Those two things don't cancel out. I know they don't. But we're alive, and Cora can breathe, and there's food for 3 months. I'm not willing to be on the road again, because the person who saved us also took pictures. Dean stared at me. Then he took the photos back, put them in the first aid box, closed the lid, and said, I want to search the area. 1 mile radius. I want to know if there's anything else. Okay? Not alone. Wes and I will stay with Cora. Take the tire iron and the kitchen knife. He geared up and left through the bunker door into gray morning light. And I sat with my children in a room built for us as someone who had studied us like we were a blueprint. And I waited for my husband to come back. And I tried very hard not to think about the photograph of me in the green coat. He returned 2 hours later. He'd found the farmhouse described in the notebook, 1.4 miles southeast, cellar locked. Key under the 3rd step, exactly as written. Inside the cellar, more supplies. Blankets, an axe, a stack of firewood, and another note. This is overflow. Use it if the bunker runs low or if you need to move. The well is functional. The hand pump is in the barn, east wall. The house itself is not secure too many windows. Sleep in the cellar if you stay. There's more, Dean said. He set a folded piece of paper on the shelf between us. I opened it. A list of names and addresses, 16 entries, all within a 5-mile radius. Next to each name, a status marker. Gone, dead, turned, unknown, relocated Morristown, dated October 5th. A census. Someone had taken a census of the surrounding area 2 days before the outbreak reached us, marking who was still human, who had left, and who had already changed. There's one more thing, Dean said. He was standing very still. 2 of the houses on the list, the ones marked relocated. I walked to the nearest one, a couple miles north. The front door was open, and inside, on the kitchen wall. He stopped. What? Names. Different names. A family of 3. Written in the same handwriting. I went to the house myself the next morning. Dean stayed with the kids. I didn't tell him why I needed to see it alone, and he didn't ask, which was either trust or exhaustion. The house was a single-story ranch on a county road, set back from the pavement by a long dirt drive. The front door was open the way Dean described, not broken, not forced, just open, as if whoever left had expected someone to come through it. Inside, the furniture was intact. A family room with a couch, a TV on a stand, a bookshelf. Dishes in the sink, dry and clean. No smell. No signs of violence. The kitchen wall next to the refrigerator in the same black marker, the same block letters. David Trask, Michelle Trask, Owen Trask. Below the names, relocated Morristown, October 4th. Michelle's mother lives at 314 Cedar Lane. Michelle will go there first. David will resist leaving. He'll want to stay and secure the property. Owen will need his bear. It's in the dryer. Check before you leave. I opened the dryer. It was empty. They'd checked. Whoever left this had written the note, and the Trasks had read it. And someone had fished a stuffed bear out of the dryer before driving to Morristown. I stood in a stranger's kitchen and understood something that I hadn't been able to see from inside my own bunker. This wasn't about us. We weren't special. We were one entry on a list. Whoever had done this, the names, the supplies, the notes, the psychologically tailored preparations, had done it for multiple families. Maybe many. The census Dean found had 16 entries. Some were marked dead or turned, but others were marked with destinations, which meant those families had been given instructions too. Specific routes, specific shelters, specific notes about who would argue and who would pack the wrong thing, and what a 7-year-old couldn't leave behind. This person had built an evacuation architecture for an entire rural area, family by family, calibrated to the interior life of each one. I walked back to the bunker on roads that were empty and cold. November in East Tennessee is gray and bare, and the trees give you nowhere to hide, but nothing moved except wind. The dead seemed to have migrated west toward the population centers, following the density of sound and motion that still existed there. Out here, in the quiet margins, the world was just empty. When I got back, I told Dean everything. He listened with the stillness he used when he was processing something large. Then he said, "So there might be other families out there, in shelters like ours, following notes from the same person." Maybe. And this person did all of this before the outbreak. Weeks before, at least. Who has that kind of resources, that kind of time? Someone who knew it was coming, Wes said from his corner. He hadn't looked up from the topo map. Or someone who was always doing this, and the outbreak just happened to be the thing they were right about. I thought about that for a long time. What kind of person spends months or years learning the intimate details of families they've never introduced themselves to, building shelters calibrated to their specific needs, and then disappearing before the crisis arrives? Not a government agency too personal, too eccentric, too specifically caring about whether a 14-year-old argues with his father about method. Not a prepper collective too focused on individual psychology. Not enough emphasis on weapons or tactical defense. Not a neighbor because a neighbor would have knocked on the door and said hello. Someone else. Someone whose relationship to other people was observation without contact, knowledge without introduction, care without presence. That night, Cora drew a picture on the back of a supply label. A house with 4 people inside and a stick figure standing outside in the dark, watching. She didn't explain it. She just stuck it to the wall with medical tape and went to bed. I peeled it off after she was asleep and held it in my hands and thought. My 11-year-old drew the thing I've been trying not to say. We are the family in the house. And out there, somewhere, the person who knew us is standing in the dark. On day 9, the radio picked up a voice. Not FEMA, not military. A woman speaking on a frequency I'd found while scanning, clear, close, maybe within a few miles. She was reading names. Trask family, if you're receiving, your secondary position at Cedar Lane has been confirmed clear as of November 12th. Martinez family, the bridge on Route 70 is impassable. Take the service road south of the railroad crossing instead. Lang family. I grabbed the radio so hard, I almost knocked it off the shelf. Your position is secure. Resupply at the farmhouse cellar will be refreshed within 72 hours. Stay in place. Then silence. Then static. Then nothing. Dean was standing behind me. We looked at each other. That was live, I said. Someone is out there, right now, managing this. Tracking who's where, restocking supplies. The voice was female. Yes. The handwriting in the notebook, could it be a woman's? I hadn't considered it. I'd been imagining a man. I don't know why. The block letters were genderless. The knowledge was genderless. The care was well. The care was specific and detailed and total. And I'd defaulted to a male image because the scale of the project felt large, and I'd inherited the bias that large-scale planning was masculine. I was ashamed of that assumption, even as I recognized it. It could be anyone, I said. Wes had been listening from the cot. She said the cellar resupply would be refreshed. That means someone is going to the farmhouse within 3 days. We could go there. Wait. See who shows up. We're not doing that, Dean said immediately. Why not? Because whoever this is has been operating in secret for a reason. If they wanted to meet us, they'd have been here, ambushing them. It's not an ambush, it's a conversation. With someone who stalked your mother and photographed her at a grocery store. The room went quiet. Cora looked at me. I hadn't told the children about the photographs. Dean's face closed as he realized what he'd just done. What photographs? Wes said. I told him, all of it. The Polaroids, the green coat, the Kroger, the windshield reflection. He listened without expression, which was his way of being furious. So this person followed you around Nashville, took pictures of you, learned everything about us, built a bunker with our names on the wall, and is now restocking our food remotely and broadcasting our status on a radio frequency. Yes. And you're fine with this. I am not fine with this. I am alive because of this. Those are different things. Wes stood up. I'm going to the farmhouse. I'll go alone if I have to. You're 14, Dean said. I'm 14 and I've seen dead people walk for 3 weeks. I'm going. Dean looked at me. I saw him waiting for me to be the one to say no. And I realized I didn't want to say no. Because Wes was right. Someone was operating in the field, moving through a world of walking dead, to restock a cellar for a family they'd never met. And I needed to know who. Not for safety, not for strategy. I needed to know because the weight of being known by someone invisible was starting to distort me. I was grateful, and I was surveilled, and I couldn't tell the difference anymore. And the inability to distinguish between those two things was eroding something fundamental in how I understood my own life. We'll go together, I said. Dean stays with Cora. Wes and I go to the farmhouse, and we wait. We left at dawn on day 10 and reached the farmhouse by mid-morning. The cellar was as Dean described. We brought water and blankets and settled into the corner farthest from the door, behind a shelf of canned goods, where we could see the entrance without being immediately visible. We waited. Wes sat with his knees up, arms around his shins, perfectly still. I sat next to him with a tire iron across my lap. We didn't talk much. Wes wasn't a talker, and I'd learned over 14 years that the conversations he valued were the ones where silence was allowed to exist, without anyone trying to fill it. Around noon, he said, "Do you remember Mrs. Hadley? From the end of our street, the older woman? She used to sit on her porch and watch us play in the yard, every day. She knew when I had baseball practice and when Cora had art class. She'd wave when the bus dropped us off. She knew our schedule better than we did. I remember. Did you think she was creepy?" "No, I thought she was lonely." "What's the difference between lonely and creepy?" "Intent," I said, "and outcome. The intent here is we're alive and Cora's breathing. The outcome is 4 people in a concrete room who would be dead without it. So, what's the problem?" "The problem is consent. We didn't choose to be known this way. We didn't choose the outbreak either. We didn't choose to be on the road. We didn't choose to run out of inhaler. Someone gave us a choice we couldn't have given ourselves. I'm not going to punish that." I looked at my son, who was 14 and spoke like he'd been thinking for 40 years, and I thought, the notebook was right. He sees what Dean and I can't. At 2:17 in the afternoon, the cellar door opened. A woman came down the steps carrying 2 plastic crates. She was maybe 60, maybe older, thin but not frail. Short gray hair, wire-frame glasses, rubber boots, a canvas jacket. She moved with the efficiency of someone who had carried things down these steps many times. She set the first crate on the floor, turned to go back for the second, and saw us. She didn't flinch. She didn't run. She stood at the base of the stairs with one hand on the railing and looked at us and said, "Oh, you're early." "Early for what?" I said. "I wasn't going to make contact until December. I wanted you settled." "Who are you?" She picked up the crate she'd set down and carried it to a shelf and began unloading it more canned food, more water, a new package of batteries. She worked while she talked, as if our presence was a scheduling adjustment, not a confrontation. "My name is Peg Braddock. I live 2 ridges east in a house that isn't on any county record because my father built it without permits in 1971. I was a social worker for DCS in Hawkins County for 31 years. I retired in 2020. That doesn't explain the bunker, or the names, or the photographs." She stopped unpacking, adjusted her glasses, looked at me, not at Wes, not at the tire iron, at me, and said, "I know it doesn't, and I know what it looks like. Can I finish stocking the shelves while I explain, or do you need me to stop moving?" "Keep going," Wes said. She kept going. "I started in August," she said, placing cans on the shelf with a label forward precision of someone who'd organized many things for many people. "August 14th. I'd been watching the data for months. The reanimation reports from Indonesia, the containment failures in Eastern Europe, the American CDC's refusal to use the word outbreak, while their own modeling showed exponential spread. I'm not a scientist. I don't have insider knowledge. I just spent 31 years reading patterns in how systems fail, and I recognize the shape." "You predicted the outbreak," I said. "I predicted a collapse. The outbreak was the specific mechanism, but the infrastructure was going to fold regardless. The supply chains, the grid dependencies, the way rural communities had been hollowed out. I've watched families fall apart for 3 decades because the systems they depended on withdrew, and this was just that on a scale too large to absorb." She finished one crate and started the second. More medical supplies, a pack of socks, children's sizes. I made a list. Not random, I drove the county the way I used to do home visits. I looked at who was here, who had children, who had medical needs, who would actually leave if told to, and who would freeze. I spent 31 years doing intake assessments, safety plans, risk evaluations. I know how to look at a family and tell you who'll make the decision, who'll resist, who'll fold, who'll hold everyone together. That's not surveillance. That's my job. It was always my job. Your job involved photographing people from parked cars, I said. She stopped, set down a can, took off her glasses and cleaned them with her jacket hem. The photographs were wrong. I know that. I took them because I needed reference images to keep the family straight. 17 families, 61 people. It was a logistical decision, and it was a violation, and I can't undo it. I didn't enjoy it. I wasn't collecting you. I was trying to remember which family needed what, and my memory isn't what it was. But you're right to be angry about that, and I won't defend it. I looked at her cleaning her glasses, and I saw 31 years of home visits in the way she handled confrontation calm, admitting wrong without collapsing, redirecting to the next actionable thing. This was a person who'd sat across from parents who'd hurt their children and had to build safety plans with them anyway. She had a tolerance for the simultaneous existence of harm and care that most people don't develop. The bunker, I said. I built 7. Your family's bunker, the Trask Cellars setup, 5 others scattered across the valley. I used my savings. I used my father's equipment. I spent August and September working 12-hour days. I stocked based on what I observed: medical needs, food preferences, ages, relational dynamics. The dynamics matter because a shelter that doesn't account for how people fight and cope will fail inside 2 weeks, regardless of how much food you put in it. "How did you know about the albuterol?" Wes asked. "And my dad's thing about acetaminophen?" "Your pharmacy. I didn't hack anything. I went to the pickup counter at the Walgreens on Gallatin Road, where your family filled prescriptions, and watched which names were called and what was in the bags. The technician holds them up and calls the last name. If you stand nearby, you can read the label. For the acetaminophen, your mother mentioned it to the pharmacist once when I was 2 people behind her in line. She said this without pride, like a report, like an intake assessment delivered to a judge. Here is what I observed. Here is my method. Here is my conclusion. And the notebook, I said. The part about how Wes and Dean argue, how I count things, how Cora responds to routine. 31 years, Mrs. Lang. I've sat in living rooms with thousands of families. After a while, you see the architecture. You see which parent is the decision maker and which one is the executor. You see which child carries the emotional weight and which one processes by withdrawing. I wasn't spying on your specific private moments. I was reading the same patterns I've read my entire career, applied to your family from the outside. That's still invasive. I know. And I'd do it again. Because you're alive. The cellar was quiet. Wes hadn't moved. I was holding the tire iron and realized I'd been gripping it so hard, my hand was cramping. "How many families made it?" I asked. "Of the 17. Her face changed for the first time. The professional calm flickered. 9 that I know of. The radio helps me track them. 3 families I couldn't reach in time. 2 refused to leave. The Garcias, they were on my list, but they were in Knoxville when it hit, and they never got to their shelter. I had it ready. The cots were made." She put her glasses back on. "Mr. and Mrs. Feldman. They were 81 and 79. I built their shelter in a church basement. I stocked it with Mr. Feldman's heart medication and Mrs. Feldman's diabetic supplies. I put in a radio and a note and soft blankets because Mrs. Feldman had fibromyalgia. They never came. Their house was empty when I checked. The door was locked. Both cars in the driveway. I don't know what happened." She said this looking at the wall, and I understood that the Feldmans were the ones she carried. Every person who does the work Peg Braddock did carries one. The one who fell through. We walked back to the bunker in failing light, Wes and I, leaving Peg at the farmhouse where she said she'd stay the night before continuing her circuit. She had rounds. She made them weekly, visiting the shelters she'd built, restocking, leaving updated notes, adjusting her radio broadcasts based on what she'd observed. She moved through infected territory on foot and by bicycle, navigating by the patterns she'd mapped, avoiding the roads where the dead congregated. "She's insane," Wes said, about a mile into the walk. "She's a social worker who never stopped working." Same thing. I almost laughed. I wanted to. But the weight of the conversation was still pressing on me, reshaping something I hadn't been able to articulate until Peg Braddock said it aloud in a cellar with her glasses off. She hadn't known us. She had assessed us. The difference was enormous, and also, functionally, it didn't matter. The bunker worked. The supplies were right. The notes were accurate. She'd read our family the way she'd read hundreds of families in crisis from the outside, through patterns, using a professional vocabulary that translated human complexity into actionable categories. She wasn't watching us because she cared about us specifically. She was watching us, because that was how her mind worked. And when the systems failed, her mind was the only system still running. It disturbed me. It saved us. Both true. Neither one resolved by the other. We made it back to the bunker without incident. The road was clear, the dead elsewhere, the evening cold and still. Dean was waiting at the door with Cora behind him, and his face when he saw us was a relief so naked it embarrassed him. And he immediately started asking logistical questions about what we'd learned. I told him everything while Cora listened. Dean's reaction was what I expected: mechanical assessment, risk evaluation, a series of practical questions about Peg's capabilities and trustworthiness that sounded like a business negotiation. Then he got to the part about the pharmacy surveillance and said, "She watched them fill our prescriptions from 2 people back in line. And that's supposed to make it acceptable?" "Nothing about this is acceptable, Dean. It's functional. Those are the categories we have left." He went quiet. Cora, who'd been listening from her cot, said, "Is she the person who made this room?" "Yes." "Can I meet her?" "I don't know. Maybe." "I want to say thank you." Dean looked at me over Cora's head, and in his eyes, I saw the thing he couldn't say in front of her. That thanking someone who surveilled your family felt like surrender, like endorsing the violation, like saying the end justified the means, and therefore the means were fine. And I saw something else too. The recognition that our 11-year-old daughter had processed in 30 seconds what the 2 of us had been arguing about for days. Peg Braddock built a room. The room kept Cora alive. Cora wanted to say thank you. The moral complexity existed, but it existed above the waterline, and Cora was swimming. That night, I opened the notebook again and reread the last page. "You are a complete system. I just gave the system a container." I'd read it as flattery the first time. Now I read it as diagnosis. We were a case file. We were an intake assessment. We were family number 9 on a list of 17, assessed for viability, profiled, provisioned, and released into a concrete room designed for our specific configuration. And we were alive. I hated how much that mattered. I hated that it outweighed everything. On day 14, Peg's radio broadcast included a warning. 2 sentences, no elaboration. Migration pattern has shifted east. Families in the Rogersville corridor should prepare for increased foot traffic within 72 hours. Dean and I spent the afternoon reinforcing the bunker entrance. We piled rocks and brush around the door until it was invisible from 10 feet away. Wes climbed the hill above us and reported sight lines. You could see the gravel road for maybe a quarter mile in each direction. And the bunker door was below the angle of vision from the road. Peg had known this when she chose the location. Of course she had. The dead came on day 16. Not a horde, we hadn't seen those. Hadn't seen the masses you hear about on the radio, fragments that still sometimes crackle through. These were stragglers. A migration pattern, Peg had called it. And she was right. They moved like water following a gradient, flowing east along the roads, pulled by something we couldn't perceive. Sound, maybe. Barometric pressure. The memory of a route they'd driven when they were alive. 7 passed the gravel road turnoff in a single afternoon. We watched from the hillside through a pair of binoculars Peg had left in the farmhouse. Wes counted them and wrote descriptions in the margin of the topo map. 2 men in work clothes. A woman in a hospital gown, barefoot, her feet black. A teenager in a football jersey. 3 others, too far gone to identify the ones who'd been changed for weeks, whose bodies had simplified into something mechanical. A walking process stripped of everything that had made them particular. Cora stayed in the bunker. Dean and I took shifts watching. Wes watched all day, and I let him because taking it away would have been worse than the watching. None of them turned toward us. The bunker's concealment held. The kudzu, the painted door, the hillside setback, all of it working exactly as designed, exactly as calculated. On day 17, one stopped a man. He stood at the junction of the gravel road and the county blacktop, about 200 yards from our position, and he didn't sway. He didn't do the idle metronome. He stood still and faced our direction and didn't move for 11 minutes. Wes timed it. 11 minutes of a dead man staring into the hillside where 4 living people were trying not to breathe. Then he turned and walked south and was gone. I climbed down from the watching position and found Dean in the bunker doorway. "We might need to move," I said. "To where?" "Peg knows other positions. She said she built 7 shelters. You want to rely on her even more. I want Cora to keep breathing." He rubbed his face with both hands, a gesture I'd seen 10,000 times across 16 years, the gesture that meant he was about to agree to something he didn't like. "Call her on the radio." I used the hand crank and found the frequency. I'd never transmitted before, only listened. My voice came out thin and strange in the concrete room. "Peg, this is Anna Lang. We're at position 1. We had a staller today. One of them stopped and faced our direction for 11 minutes. Do we need to move?" Static. Long enough that I thought she wasn't listening. Then, "Describe the behavior. Was there tracking motion, head movement, orienting toward sound?" "No, completely still, facing uphill. 11 minutes. Then he walked south." A pause. "That's territorial scanning. It's new behavior. Started about 10 days ago in the western corridor. They're not hunting, they're mapping. Learning geography. Stay in place for now, but pack a go bag for each family member. If you see a second staller within 48 hours, move to the farmhouse cellar and wait for my next broadcast. I'll redirect you from there. Thank you. Mrs. Lang. Anna. There's something else. I've located another family that was en route to a shelter I built near Church Hill, but there's stalled vehicle trouble. 2 adults, 1 child, roughly 8 miles north of your position. I can't reach them. My route north is blocked. If you have fuel and a vehicle, I need to ask something I don't have the right to ask." I knew what she was going to say before she said it. "I need you to go get them." Dean said no, immediately, firmly, without discussion. "We're not driving 8 miles through open territory to rescue strangers based on a radio call from a woman who stalked us. She didn't stalk us. She assessed us." "You're using her language now. That's exactly the problem." He was right, and I didn't care. Because Peg's voice had contained something I recognized, the sound of a person who had run out of options and was asking someone else to carry a weight she couldn't reach. I'd heard it in my own voice 19 days ago when I'd said on in, "Dean, get the bags." The sound of someone transferring urgency because the clock was already counting. "There's a child," I said. "There's 2 children here. Cora has the bunker. She has the inhaler. She has food and water and a concealed door. This family is stalled on the road. And what if we don't come back?" The question hit me in the center of the chest, not because it was unfair, because it was the question I'd been asking myself for 19 days about every decision. What if this is the one that kills us? And I was tired of it. Tired of the calculus. Tired of subtracting risk from risk and coming up with a number that meant stay here. Don't move. Let someone else die because your margins are thin. "Wes stays with Cora," I said. "You and I go. If we're not back by dark, Wes follows Peg's instructions. He's capable. He's 14. He's the reason we found Peg. He's the one who said we should go to the farmhouse. He reads the situation better than we do, and you know it." Dean stared at me. I watched him do the thing he always did: resist, evaluate, recognize that I'd already made the decision, and then pivot to execution. It was the pattern Peg had described in the notebook. Anna will make the decision, and Dean will execute it. And there it was, performing itself like a script. He was afraid of that. So was I. But the family 8 miles north was more afraid than either of us. We left Wes with the tire iron, the radio, and instructions. Cora hugged me at the door with a grip that said she understood more than I wanted her to. And then she let go and said, "Bring them here." Not a question, a directive. From an 11-year-old who had decided that the bunker with her name on the wall was big enough for more. The truck started on the first try. Dean had maintained it with the obsessive attention he'd applied to the filtration system. We drove north on the county road, slow, scanning. The road was empty for the first 3 miles. Then we began to see them. Not on the road, in the fields, standing in dead soybean rows, spaced out like scarecrows, facing different directions. The stallers, 8 of them, maybe 10 hard to count, because some were partially concealed by the stubble. None of them moved as we passed. They stood, and they faced, and they mapped. Oh no. And the sight of them arranged across an open field in the gray light of November was worse than any chase or attack, because it meant the dead were developing methodology. At mile 6, we found the car. A gray Honda Civic pulled off onto the shoulder with the hood up. Steam or smoke residue on the engine block. 2 adults visible inside. A child's car seat in the back. Dean pulled up behind them and killed the engine. I got out, hands visible, and walked to the driver's window. The man inside was maybe 30. Dark hair, exhausted. The woman in the passenger seat was holding a toddler against her chest, maybe 2 years old, wrapped in a blanket. The man looked at me with the expression I'd seen on every face for 3 weeks. The calculation of whether a stranger was salvation or threat. "I'm Anna Lang. Peg Braddock sent us." The name changed his face. Relief, instant and total. The kind that makes your eyes fill before you can stop it. She said someone would come. I didn't believe her. "What happened to the car?" "Radiator. We've been here since yesterday. I was about to try walking." "With the baby?" "I was going to go alone. Find help. Come back." The woman in the passenger seat spoke for the first time. He was not going alone. Her voice had a flatness to it that I recognized as the sound of an argument that had been happening for hours before we arrived. "Okay," I said. "We have a truck. There's a shelter 6 miles south. It's concealed and stocked. Let's move." His name was Javier Soto. His wife was Carmen. The baby was Luis. They'd been heading to a shelter Peg had built near Church Hill when the radiator blew. They'd spent the night in the car with the doors locked and the windows cracked, listening to movement in the dark. "How many?" I asked, as Dean helped transfer their supplies to the truck bed. I counted 4 passing after midnight. One stopped for a while, just stood there by the back bumper. Carmen held Luis tighter when he said that, and her face didn't change at all. And I understood that she'd been sitting in that car with a dead thing standing behind her, and she hadn't screamed because the baby was sleeping. We made it back by early afternoon. No contact. The stallers in the field were still there, still standing, still facing their invisible coordinates. Dean drove past them at a steady 30, and nobody breathed. Wes met us at the bunker door. He'd heard the truck and had the tire iron ready, and his face when he saw Javier and Carmen carrying Luis was complicated relief, resentment, resignation. More people meant less time, less food, less margin. He knew the math. But he opened the door wider and stepped aside and said, "There's water heating on the stove." The bunker felt different with 7 people in it. Smaller, louder, more real. Luis made sounds, not words yet, just the babble of a toddler who didn't know the world had ended. And the sound of a human voice that had nothing to do with survival was so foreign that all of us stopped and listened like it was music. Carmen was quiet. She held Luis and watched us, and took the measure of everything: the supplies, the sleeping arrangements, the notebook I'd left on the shelf, the names on the wall. When she saw the names, she touched them the way Dean had on the first day and said, "We had this too, at the Church Hill shelter. Our names on the wall, Luis's formula brand, Javier's blood type." "Did you find a notebook?" I asked. "No, just the names and a map and a note that said to stay and wait. But we couldn't. The road to Church Hill was blocked and we had to detour and the car died." "Peg didn't give you a notebook?" "Who's Peg?" She didn't know. They'd found the shelter marked on a map left in their mailbox in early October. No name, no explanation. And when the outbreak hit, they'd followed the instructions because the alternative was nothing. They'd never heard a voice on the radio. They'd never met Peg. They'd driven toward a bunker built by a stranger based on a map left anonymously in their mail because their son needed formula and someone had written the right brand on a wall. That night, I sat outside the bunker in the dark. Dean was inside, helping Javier rig a second sleeping area. Cora was showing Carmen how the camp stove worked. Wes was watching Luis with an expression I'd never seen on his face, something between curiosity and tenderness that he would have denied under oath. I turned on the radio and transmitted. "Peg, the Sotos are here. They're safe. Luis is fine." Her response came quickly, as if she'd been waiting. "Thank you, Ana." They didn't have a notebook, just the map and names. I ran out of time. I was still writing it when they had to leave early. I'm sorry. "How many more are out there? How many families are stalled or lost or in the wrong shelter?" Silence. Then, "More than I can reach alone." Then, "Stop being alone." More silence. I listened to the static and the cold and the distant sound of something moving through the trees. Wind, probably, or something that used to be alive. "I built these shelters for families," Peg said finally. "Not for me. There was never a shelter with my name on it." The words landed in me like a stone dropped into water. 31 years of intake assessments, safety plans, home visits, and risk evaluations. And at the end, the social worker who'd saved 17 families hadn't included herself in the system. She'd built an architecture of care for everyone except the architect. "Come here," I said. "We have room." "You don't. I calculated the food supply for 4. You're already at 7. Then we'll go to the farmhouse for the overflow. Or we'll forage. Or you'll teach us which houses are empty and we'll scavenge. Peg, you built the container. Stop standing outside of it." She didn't answer for a long time. When she did, her voice was different. Not the professional calm. Not the intake assessment tone. Something underneath. "I'll come at first light." She arrived at dawn on day 19, carrying a backpack and a bicycle she'd ridden 7 miles in the dark. She was thinner than I remembered from the cellar. Her glasses were taped at the hinge. She'd been sleeping, she admitted when I asked, in a deer blind on her father's property. No heat, no insulation, a tarp and a sleeping bag, rated for weather 10 degrees warmer than what November was delivering. I brought her inside. She stood in the bunker she'd built and looked at the wall where she'd written our names. and didn't say anything for a long time. Cora walked up to her and said, "Thank you for my inhaler." Peg Braddock, who had held herself together through months of surveillance and construction and solitary logistics and weekly circuits through infected territory, bent at the waist and put her hands on her knees and made a sound that wasn't crying because it was too deep and too compressed for crying. It was the sound of a system failing in the way systems fail when the pressure they were built to contain is finally released. Carmen brought her water. Dean cleared a space on the shelf and put a blanket down. Wes moved his things without being asked. Javier held Luis on his hip and watched from the corner with the quiet attention of a man who'd learned that survival sometimes looked like standing back. Peg drank the water, straightened up, cleaned her glasses, and said, "I have updates on the other families. Can I use the radio?" And just like that, she was working again. Because that was the architecture of Peg Braddock, she could break for exactly 1 moment, and then the structure reasserted itself. 31 years of holding other people's crises without setting them down had built a person who could receive care for approximately 45 seconds before converting it into a task. I let her work. She broadcast updates, adjusted routes, confirmed positions. But that evening, when the radio was off, and the bunker was quiet, and Luis was asleep in Carmen's arms, I sat next to Peg against the wall and said, "You wrote that we were a complete system. What are you?" She considered this the way she considered everything clinically, thoroughly, as if the question were an assessment she needed to fill out correctly. I'm a 58-year-old woman who spent her career writing reports about other people's families and went home every night to an empty house and a cat who died in 2022. I have no children, no partner, no living parents. When I saw what was coming, I didn't think about myself because there was no self to think about. There was only the work. There's always only been the work. There's you. I'm not a category I know how to fill. I looked at the wall, our names in her handwriting. The handwriting of a woman who could diagnose a family's emotional architecture from a pharmacy line, but couldn't build herself a shelter. "Cora," I said, "come here." Cora came over, holding the colored pencil she'd been using to draw on the back of a supply label. "Write Peg's name on the wall." Cora looked at me, then at Peg, then at the wall. She uncapped the marker I handed her, the same black permanent marker found in the supply bin, and in her 11-year-old handwriting, uneven and earnest, she wrote, "Peg Braddock." Peg stared at it. Her hand came up to her glasses and then stopped and dropped to her lap, and she sat there with her name on the wall next to ours, written by a child she'd saved, in a room she'd built but never meant to enter. 8 months later, the wall has more names. 14 now. The Sotos, the Kaplan family from 2 valleys over, who found their shelter flooded and walked until Peg's radio brought them to us. Dale Mercer, 67, a retired electrician who arrived alone and rewired the farmhouse in 3 days. 2 teenagers, Bridget and Sam, who'd survived 5 weeks in a gas station and still flinch at the sound of metal on metal. I count the supplies every morning. Dean maintains the systems. Wes draws maps and extends the survey grid and speaks in complete paragraphs now, though only about logistics. Cora has not needed her inhaler in 4 months, the mountain air, or growth, or luck, or something I don't have a word for. Peg does her rounds. Shorter now, because the territory is smaller. We've consolidated the shelters, brought the families together, built what she calls a network and what I call a neighborhood. She still sleeps less than anyone, still converts every emotion into a task, still struggles to sit in a room she built when someone else offers her food from shelves she stocked. But her name is on the wall. Cora checks it every morning, a habit that started as a game and became something else. She runs her finger across each name like she's reading attendance, making sure everyone's still written, making sure nobody's been erased. I stand in the bunker sometimes and look at the wall, our names in a stranger's handwriting, a stranger's name in my daughter's. And I think about the word that's been following me since day one. The word I couldn't identify when I first saw our names on the concrete. It wasn't fear. It wasn't gratitude. It was recognition. The vertigo of discovering you were seen completely, invasively, without permission by someone who saw you more clearly than you had ever seen them. And the slow, uncomfortable, irreversible understanding that being known without your consent is a violation and a gift. And that some gifts arrive in shapes you never learn to hold comfortably. And you carry them anyway, because the alternative is the dark.